Okay, you've been given this worksheet and we're going to be going over the components of literature analysis in this flipped classroom format. For those of you who have not used it, flipped classroom, also known as blended learning, is designed to allow you to watch the video and review the content at your own pace. You can pause, you can rewind, you can rewatch, or you can stop and ask the teacher for more help if you need it. This particular flipped class video has been designed to help you with a guided notes portion. You've been given this worksheet. You should fill it out as you go. Again, you can pause it if you need to, and towards the end there's some independent practice as well. So now to get started with components of literature analysis. Literature analysis is really important because it helps us understand a story's meaning and significance, as well as how and why a poem, short story, novel, or play was written. You need to remember that authors make specific choices for very particular reasons. Literature analysis is separated into a variety of categories: characterization, theme, plot structure, figurative language, imagery, perspective, and setting. Each aspect of literature analysis helps the reader understand the article in a more complete way. And if you guys notice the asterisk next to characterization and theme, that means that there are going to be larger topics that we go into later this week in more detail, and we're going to focus on the other topics in the meantime. So plot structure is our first part. Plot is the arrangement of ideas or incidents that make up a story. Exposition is the background information that includes telling all about the background story. You guys can't really see that beneath this cutoff here, but imagine that the exposition or beginning is at the very bottom of this little mountain. Rising action is the process the story follows as it builds to the main conflict. Climax is the most exciting part of the story. It's a significant turning point and often where the main character is forced to make a tough choice. Falling action is the part of the story after the climax and before the very end. Usually most loose ends of the story are tied up there and any unresolved issues are taken care of. And the resolution or denouement is the way the story turns out and what happens to each character after the action. Now I'm going to show you an example of a story that you guys all should have seen or heard of and tell you a little bit more about the plot structure in the context of that story.
This video will teach you the elements of a plot structure using a story we're all familiar with, Disney's Aladdin. The first part or beginning is called the exposition. The first thing the exposition does is to introduce the important characters. In Aladdin, this would be our main character Aladdin, Jasmine, Iago and Jafar, Abu, and the Sultan. The exposition also gives an initial description of the setting. This is not only where the story takes place, but also when it takes place and the customs associated with that place. In Aladdin, this would be the city of Agrabah. We don't know the specific time, but we do know it's pre-technology and the culture is Middle Eastern. The last thing the exposition does is it sets up the story. In Aladdin, this would be when Jafar gets Aladdin to go to the Cave of Wonders and get the lamp. The next element of the plot is called the rising action. This is the biggest chunk of the story, and it consists of all the events that build up to the climax. In Aladdin, this includes things like Aladdin meeting the genie, becoming Prince Ali Ababwa, falling in love with Jasmine, and having the lamp stolen by Iago. The next part is called the climax. This is the most intense and exciting part of the story. It's also the turning point where a solution is given. In Aladdin, this would be when Aladdin fights Jafar, who turns into a giant snake, and Aladdin defeating him by tricking him into becoming a genie. The final elements of the plot are called the falling action and resolution. These are often grouped together because they have the same purpose, which is to tie up all the loose ends of the story and end it. In Aladdin, this would be the genie getting his freedom, and Jasmine choosing to marry Aladdin. So those are the elements of the plot structure. Don't forget them.
As we continue, in addition to the linear storytelling in a traditional plot structure, an author can also use literary devices to further the story. such things like foreshadowing, when the writer clues the reader into something that will eventually occur. It could be explicit, which means obvious, or implied, which is disguised. They could also include writing in some scenes with suspense, which is the tension that the author uses to create a feeling of discomfort about the unknown. Think about any of the scenes in a book that you've read where you're not sure if the killer is going to catch your character or if they're going to get caught doing something. Those are suspenseful moments that the writer builds into the story. And they also include general conflict, which is struggle between opposing forces. As far as figurative language goes, on your worksheet you have a space to include personal examples as well as the examples here, so please make sure you do that. Figurative language is the use of words to express meaning beyond the literal meaning of the words themselves. A metaphor is used to contrast seemingly unalike things to enhance the meaning of a situation or theme without using like or as. For example, you could say, "You are the sunshine of my life." That does not literally mean that you are someone who warms the earth and provides life-sustaining water and survival. A simile is contrasting to something unalike that uses like or as. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Obviously, a dream is an idea and not a concrete thing that cannot literally dry up. Hyperbole is an exaggeration, which you middle school students use quite a lot. I have a million things to do today. I have 100 hours of homework to do tonight, that sort of thing. And personification is giving non-human objects human characteristics, like America has thrown her hat into the ring and will be joining forces with the British. In addition to the examples I've given you, like I mentioned, please make sure you include examples of your own. Imagery. Imagery is the author's attempt to create a mental picture or reference point in the mind of the reader. Remember, the most immediate forms of imagery are visual. Strong and effective imagery can be used to invoke an emotional, sensational, or even physical response. Here's an example. I opened the door and the smell of the salt smacked me in the face like a brick. I had never seen the ocean before and it stood before me unable to move. My knees wobbled at the sight. The ocean was an endless landscape of pitch and power. I heard the shriek of a seagull above me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly like I was home. The detail used in that passage is a great example of imagery because it takes into account making the reader feel the sensation of seeing the ocean, of hearing the seagull, and of smelling the salt. It's really using very descriptive language to put the reader in the position of your character. Perspective. Perspective is who tells the story and how it is told. The point of view of a story can sometimes indirectly establish the author's intentions. A narrator is a person telling the story who may or may not be a character in the story. A first-person perspective is when the narrator participates in action but sometimes has limited knowledge or vision. They're speaking from their own perspective about their own experiences. Second person is when the narrator addresses the reader directly as though they are part of the story. For example, you walk into your bedroom and you see clutter everywhere. It's kind of like an invisible person telling the main characters what to do or what's happening. Third person is where the narrator is unnamed or unidentified. They're a detached observer. Pretend that they're above the whole scene telling the story without actually being a part of it. They do not assume a character's perspective, and it's not a character in the story. The narrator reports on events that let the reader supply the meaning. An omniscient narrator is an all-knowing narrator. They have multiple perspectives. The narrator knows what each character is thinking and feeling, not just what they're doing throughout the story. This type of narrator usually jumps around within the text, following one character for a few pages or chapters, and then switching to another character for a few pages, chapters, etc. Omniscient characters are sometimes they step out of a character's mind to evaluate him or her in some sort of meaningful way. Setting is really important as well, and the setting is a place or location of the action. The setting provides a historical and cultural context for the characters. It often can symbolize the emotional state of the characters. The example listed here is in Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. The crumbling old mansion reflects the decaying state of both the family and the narrator's mind. We also see this type of emphasis in the setting in Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. An example that may be more familiar to you would be in The Maze Runner. The setting of the maze is both a literal construction where the characters are stuck, but also representative of the characters' mindsets. They're confused, they're lost, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know where they are, and they don't know how they got there, as if they were in a maze as well. So now it's going to be time for you to practice independently. When you finish the video for this slideshow, begin reading your independent reading book and fill out some of the details for your book as you read. I obviously realize that if you're still reading it, you have not yet reached the conclusion. Fill it out to the best of your ability using the book that you have and list examples as they're asked on the worksheet. If you have any questions, you can always ask your teacher as you watch this video. You can rewind, you can replay, or you can pause it as you go in order to make sure you have enough time to fill out everything you need.